get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
Hey, what do you say? It's time for another Mike Vrabel and Diana Rossini update here on Kneecaps for Breakfast. Fitz Brokart, that's me. Happy to be joined alongside my longtime partner in crime, Phil Byrne. And Phil, no, it's not April Fool's Day anymore. It's going to be May 1st when this is being dropped to your devices. But, whoa-wee, that's like a train wreck you can't look away from.
And if you're joining us on Spotify, you might be able to go find their playlist that apparently was
Did you hear about that?
baby making music or something on there. We'll keep it G-rated here for the most part.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Thankfully we're not going to expunge on that too much.
No.
We've got I don't know, the NFL draft to talk about. Yes,
That's
this is
it.
our draft recap episode. So
And we
Vince,
appreciate you bearing with us. I mean, it's been an interesting week, and Phil and I finally got both of our stars to align just the same to where we're cutting this a full week after the draft opened up in Pittsburgh. But hey, better late than never, and a little unexpected treat for you on the back end to have something to spend your weekend with or enter into your weekend with, as you get a little bit of post-draft, as Chris Berman would say, let us be among the very last to break down the NFL draft with you on Kneecaps for Breakfast. So that's what Phil and I are up to on this day. So let's not waste too much more time with it, Phil. We kind of knew that this was definitely a making of quite an underwhelming offseason, to say the least, with as little as the Lions did in free agency when the league year opened up. We saw guys like DJ Wanham and kind of filler material come through the door. What's his name? McCreary, the corner, the nickel guy they brought in. It's like, really, this is the best we're going to do. So we have in the back of our mind, okay, at least there's the draft that took place on the back end. And honestly, this is what Brad Holmes typically has done best as a general manager. And I think a lot of that speaks to his experience in the scouting side of things before he took the Lions general manager job. So we kind of always knew that, okay, if there's any way that Brad can really work a little bit of magic, it's in the draft. And clearly that's the methodology to which the Lions want to build this thing. So we kind of knew, okay, here we go. Let's see what happens. However, it didn't seem quite as excitement driven as it had in recent years. And Phil, you and I kind of touched on a few weeks ago that in recent years there was a lot of hype, not just for the Lions but for the NFL as a whole with the draft coming up, and I just wasn't hearing any excitement whatsoever. And even in the aftermath, I'm not just talking Lions, I'm talking the NFL at large, you just aren't hearing the post buzz about it. There isn't uproar over this guy should have been taken here and not there, and oh, this guy fell here and this guy got taken there, and there was this kind of like, okay, this happened here and this happened there, and hey, we move on. Speak to that, Phil. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a couple things. I think we've had a couple drafts in the past 5 years, really, where first 10 picks, 15 picks has been dominated by quarterbacks. And in this one, we did have a surprise quarterback go in the first round. I think maybe not a surprise to some draft experts, but it was a surprise to me with Ty Simpson going to the Rams at 13. But other than Fernando Mendoza, there weren't a lot of quarterbacks at play. I think the other thing, too, is when we look at like the draft trends, NIL has been in effect for all these players that were drafted now long enough that many of them switched teams. Maybe they weren't the biggest stars on their new teams. You maybe even forgot what school some of these players went to. There was no FCS player taken until day 3, which is at least the 4th round. So first round, second round, third round, no FCS players. These are guys that probably got an NIL deal or transferred in to a bigger program. And then I think just, looking at where this draft was, I don't think you had the star power coming out of the SEC. I think you essentially had Mendoza, you had the Ohio State guys, you had Jeremiah Love out of Notre Dame, and maybe some of the Miami guys. I think that was really where the star power was with this draft. And going back a couple months into the season, unless it seemed like maybe an athlete would have had a good pro day or combine or, whatever and go up draft boards, people were saying that like once you get past pick 5, there's not a ton of difference between pick 6 and pick 28 in the first round. So there was a huge drop off from like the top of the board to kind of where you're at. And I think that's pretty reflective in terms of how the Lions actually pick themselves.
And I think you hit on it a little bit too, in that a lot of times when people are watching college football, they're starting to do the old thing where they're paying more attention to the name on the front of the jersey as opposed to the name on the back of the jersey. And frankly, I don't think that the common fan is really developing that kind of relationship with these players that they once did. So I'm just thinking in terms of, okay, you have these NFL fans who are watching their team do the draft. They just don't know these players like they once did. So therefore, it's awfully hard to get really invested into the draft process if you could give two hoots about who they take, because you don't know who these guys are half the time.
Well, for instance, and we'll go pick by pick here with the Lions in a couple of minutes, but they picked two guys from Michigan. And, I think everyone had a pretty good idea of who Derek Moore was. He was at Michigan a long time. He didn't transfer. He was there for 4
But you
years.
could argue he wasn't even the most popular Moore on his own team.
Exactly. But Jimmy Rolder, this is a guy that did not play until his final season of Michigan. He didn't get the reps. And then when he did play, I think the Lions saw an Alex Anzalone replacement in Jimmy Rolder. But when the pick came through, I was like, oh, well, I mean, I remember him from this past year, but like I don't remember a ton of like his game or, really his impact on Michigan as a whole. So it's like that was a fourth round pick. Whereas in years past, local kid gets drafted, to the Lions or something. And you're like, oh, wow, that's cool. So we just didn't really have that in place. So um, really kind of interesting setup going into this draft. And, I think the other thing too is when you talk about not having a ton of difference from pick 6 to pick 28 in the first round, you don't all of a sudden get a lot of trades either. So, a couple years ago, that's where Brad Holmes made his money, in the trade back kind of scenario, getting a Jameer Gibbs and a Laporta and a Brian Branch and a Jack Campbell. Um, you know, we traded up in the second round to get Derek Moore, but we stand pat at 17. We'll let the board fall as it may. And I think we kind of took a pick that isn't too flashy, but I think, for most people, I think they probably don't have too many complaints about the pick itself.
So let's get right to that first pick. So the Lions did indeed hold pat at pick 17, which there was discussion. What do you do? Do you move up and take somebody? Do you hold steady and take somebody? Do you trade out of the pick altogether and go down and acquire more bargaining chips, draft picks, if you will? And the Lions, as we said, held at 17, and they went with position of need. And I know that the philosophy with this regime has always been we don't look at position of need. We go for the best player available. We're looking for the best football players to fill our team. They clearly went with a need on this one, and I think it was obviously exacerbated with the trade or the letting go of Taylor Decker. So now all of a sudden you had a huge hole on one of your sides, your offensive line. We kind of knew that, even though they kind of played coy about it, that, hey, we're open to the idea of moving Penei Sewell to left tackle. I kind of perceived that as writing on the wall, that that was a done deal. And now you're going to fill that position in the draft because it's much easier to draft a NFL ready right tackle in a lot of cases than it is to plug him in at left tackle on day one. And we kind of had a feeling that's what the Lions were going to do, and they essentially told you as much based on a lot of the offseason conduct they had with a lot of these players in terms of bringing them into Allen Park and spending time at pro days and at the scouting combines, who are they paying attention to, and all this. And that exactly came to pass. And we had a list of a handful of guys that would probably make sense to serve on this offensive line as a rookie coming up, and they settled on Blake Miller out of Clemson. I know that one of the guys that was talked pretty highly about with the Lions was Monroe Freeling out of Georgia, a fellow teammate of Tate Ratledge's, so they would have been reunited on the offensive line with the Lions, and they decided to pass over him and went with Blake Miller. He's a kid who made 54 career starts at Clemson.
Yeah.
He's a guy that never, ever, 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 ever missed a game, never, ever, 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 except for one exception, missed a practice. So when you just look at the durability aspect, he's a guy who can be counted on. He's a guy that does not need to be externally motivated. He's a self-starter, and he's a guy who will show up for you day in, day out. And just kind of looking at his overall attitude and persona as it pertains to being a potential NFL player, he's as much of a Detroit Lion to me as you were going to find in this draft.
Yeah. I think he definitely fits the MO. The Miller versus Monroe Freeling argument is really interesting too, because Blake Miller only played on the right side. Monroe Freeling only played on the left side. Monroe Freeling only had the 1 year experience. I know some people viewed Monroe Freeling as potentially the top tackle in this draft as well, versus Blake Miller, who I would be pretty safe to say I don't think was the top tackle on anyone's board. I think he was usually around maybe the third tackle. That was kind of his third or fourth tackle in his range. Um, but it's about as safe and steady, and you know what you're getting kind of pick that you could possibly get at 17. Um, I threw his name out there, a month before the draft, saying that there was a lot of chatter on Caden Proctor and Blake Miller if the Lions were going to stick at 17 and pick a tackle. They're very, very different in terms of how they operate. Worth noting that Nick Saban made the comment about Caden Proctor and his work ethic. And as soon as
Caden
that
Proctor,
comment got out,
moving bus.
yeah, it was like, okay, well, unless he is there in a trade back scenario, if the Lions trade back to like 20 or 25 or something, I don't think they would pick him at 17. So I think just like when you look at like the risk assessment at 17, there's like no risk with Blake Miller right there. So he's about as safe of a pick as you can get, and that's what the pick was.
So what is the next point of conversation about this, though, is Blake Miller, the football player. We talked about Blake Miller, the guy, and the
Yeah.
character, but here's the thing about Blake Miller as a football player. This isn't like Clemson is in their zenith by any means. This is some of Clemson's worst football they've played over the last 54 games in recent memory. They've definitely taken a hard left compared to where they were, and I think a lot of that is because Dabo, their head coach at Clemson, has been a little bit more reticent to embrace a lot of those, NIL and transfers and everything like that. The way the college game has gone, he's been a little bit more going by the way of the dinosaurs on a lot of those philosophies. So you really haven't seen the Clemson wins and loss records that we've been accustomed to. We haven't seen them put up all these gaudy numbers on offense. So we know that he's been very durable and whatnot, but because Clemson isn't the Clemson that people have grown used to, a lot of people didn't know who Blake Miller was. I didn't know who Blake Miller was until it came time to start scouting out potential offensive line talent because we all of a sudden had a need on our roster for it. And I think a lot of Lions fans are in the same boat that they just didn't spend a whole lot of time logging minutes watching Blake Miller play in college because Clemson kind of fell off the face of the earth there for about the same amount of time that Blake Miller was lining up and playing right tackle. So
Well, and
in terms of
what's
what he's
really
actually going to do on the field is still kind of a question mark in a big way to Tom, Dick, and Harry.
well, and I think the interesting thing is I brought it up a couple moments ago, like in this era of NIL and transfers and everything, and I know Clemson obviously has money, but you would think unless he is 100% committed into the program, and again, maybe that's a conversation the Lions had with him, that there would have been an offer to go transfer to, some school that maybe would have been closer on the national title trajectory. Maybe he thought Clemson was going to be his final season. Um, they had a lot of returning players, and some other things that were favorable in their side, but um, you know, he's not the most dominant at anything, but he is very, very consistent. Um, he should, from day one, be our starting right tackle. Is the way that I view this. I don't think you want Larry Borum out there to start. Um, so I don't know what his potential is going to be. I kind of feel like his potential is probably going to be a little less than a Pro Bowler, and it won't be quite as high. Maybe Taylor Decker had a higher potential, but I think in terms of like needing to get it right on the offensive line, making sure that Jared Goff is comfortable, I think that's about as good as you could possibly get in that scenario, in my opinion, if you were going offensive tackle. Now, there were some other things going on in the first round. I put in the scenario to look out for in the first round. It didn't really go into a run on receivers that I thought could possibly happen. But with the defensive ends from Miami coming to play, Akeem Mesidor was still on the board when we were picking, and then Bain, the All American, he went 2 picks before the Lions at 15. They didn't trade up to get them, and that's kind of where we go into the second pick in the second round, with Derek Moore. So, I think in the first round that was about as safe as you can get. I think he's going to be a day one starter.
Which is
We
what
at
you
least
hope to
need,
get with your number one pick in the draft. So your
if you
first
don't
round
have,
pick, you had sure as heck better be a starter.
and unfortunately, the way that Brad set this up, you need those first 2 picks to be starters.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're in pretty good shape with this. We talked about the acquisition of Cade Mays a handful of weeks back, and the way Mays is he's a really, really good pass protector. He's a god awful run blocker. It's the exact opposite with Blake Miller. He's great in the run game. He leaves a little bit to be desired in pass protection. So we got a little bit of contrasting what one guy's good at, what the other guy's good at, a little bit of contrast there. So we'll see if both can kind of even things out a little bit to make the offensive line a little bit more cohesive in terms of what they're able to do as a unit. But now I think it's pretty safe to say, Phil, after what we've seen, you got Cade Mays at center. You've got your stability at right guard and left guard from last year. You've got Sewell at left tackle. You'll have Blake Miller at right tackle. You've got Borum as that Dan Skipper like floater who can come in and fill in a variety of different areas. And they, for better, worse, or otherwise, still have Juice Scruggs on the roster that can also fill in some interior depth as well. So all of a sudden, you went from a glaring weakness to now you're feeling a little bit better about things on the offensive line. So that at least allows Lions fans to sleep a little bit better. But as you hinted at, Phil, there was still lots of work to be done on the defensive side
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
And that's where, fortunately, the Lions decided to spend some time in rounds 2 and 3 getting, or was it 2 and 4? I can't even.
Two and
I
four.
think 2 and
Yep.
4. Yeah, they didn't have a third round pick. So taking care of that defense. Derek Moore, like we said, was the pick for the Lions at 50, and they traded up to get him. So Brad has proven in his drafts he's not afraid to go up and get a guy that he thinks is worthwhile. And again, usually when I think of Moore, defense, Michigan, I think of Rod Moore, but Derek Moore was the pick at 50 overall. And like you said, has really come into more of a role in the last couple of years. So this was after the run to the championship. He really, in my mind, kind of burst onto the scene in the bowl game against Alabama last season, where he had a couple of nice hits on Jalen Milroe, recovered a fumble, if my memory serves me right, and then was going to look to step into an even greater role in 2025. He was named a captain for the season and really, in my mind, played really well, was definitely one of the linchpins of that defense, and he was named the team MVP for 2025. So, as many good things as that team that went 8-4 a season ago goes, he had himself a great year. In my mind, I think the numbers are a little bit skewed, if I'm being fair. I think he maybe put up a little bit stronger numbers against some weaker competitions. Think the Purdue's and the Michigan States and some of the non-conference teams of the world maybe didn't show up as much against the Ohio States or some of the stronger teams on the schedule. But your thoughts on what Derek Moore can bring to the other side of the defensive line opposite of Aiden Hutchinson?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't think he was in the top 5 best available, if you will, to start night 2 in the second round. Um, but it started to go, I think a couple defensive linemen went before this pick, if memory serves me right. And they knew that new Ravens coach Mike Minter was going to be on the clock right after this pick that they traded up to go get. I think this was the Jets pick that they traded up with. So
Yep.
Aaron Glenn and them making the call there to get this done. So I'm guessing that they thought that there was a good chance that if Derek Moore was who they wanted, they had to go make a play, or they would just be out of luck with getting a defensive end in the second round here. Um, I think it was maybe still a little early to go get him, but a guy that I think has ideal size for the position. I think maybe, you think about who the captains are on this team, and like them, love them, don't like them, don't love them, good, bad, indifferent. Jared Goff's the captain of the offense. I think on defense, the captain of the defense is Aiden Hutchinson. I'm not saying those guys were in the draft room and not putting that out there, but it almost kind of seems like if you were given the draft board to those guys in round 1 and it was Goff's call, he probably would have went with Blake Miller. I think Hutch, he's like, we need to go get another defensive end. I'm going to go get my guy from Michigan. Derek Moore said he, studied the tape of Hutch when he came in. They never had a chance to play. So I think the Lions like that too. And another guy that I think is going to have no problem buying into the Lions team first philosophy and culture. And I think he's going to be good there. I don't know how explosive he is. I think that's the one thing. Like, this is not a guy who ever would have gone in a top 10 based on like explosiveness or anything. So those guys from Ohio State that went much more explosive. But I think he's going to be consistent. And I think Blake Miller is a surefire day one starter. I don't know what the plan is with DJ Wanham necessarily, but I would venture at least midseason, I think Derek Moore should be a starter.
So, do you think Moore is going to command the level of respect similar to what you would expect from a NFL edge rusher, or do you think it's going to take some time for him to kind of earn that? I mean, I don't want to put him in the same stratosphere as Aiden Hutchinson because they're not in the same stratosphere, but you knew that the minute he stepped onto the field, you were commanding the respect of the team that was lined up across from you. Do you think he's going to have any inherent respect for his game, or do you think this is something where he's going to need to start winning people over first?
He might have to start winning people over. I think Hutch is still going to get you know, double team focus, and maybe that's something that Moore can play to his strength and get a little bit more open as far as shedding blocks and not getting plays directed to him, because I would venture that these offensive coordinators are going to want to go away from Hutch. So I think he's going to have an opportunity to be impactful right from the beginning, but I don't think it's going to be anyone is game planning a play away from Derek Moore.
So that was the only pick of Friday night. So the Lions weren't going to pick again until
Yeah.
118 in the fourth round. And now was a little bit of a shift in approach because now the Lions are sticking with their approach of positions of need once again instead of going for best available. So they're not only going for positions of need, but the philosophy is switching a little bit to now they're replacing actual guys. So we know that there was some departure of personnel this past offseason, and now the Lions were kind of using this opportunity in the draft to fill specific points of need from a personnel standpoint. So now you bring in linebacker Jimmy Rolder out of Michigan, a 1-year starter. So he was actually on the national championship team, but he didn't actually play any meaningful minutes or snaps until just this past year. And he led Michigan rather in tackles, 73 tackles, 7 for loss, 2 sacks. But you kind of mentioned it, Phil. A lot of his game kind of reminds you a little bit of Anzalone. They lost Anzalone, so they knew they were going to need to replace his production. I think the idea was we need to find the next Alex Anzalone somewhere in this draft. They think they found somebody like that. You think he's a guy that can step in and really take on that role right away, or do you think he may need to kind of shed some of that greenness a little bit?
Well, I think Malcolm Rodriguez, if we are going in a three linebacker set, as of right now, is going to be that third linebacker until proven otherwise or gets hurt or something like that. But make no mistake about it, this guy is an Alex Anzalone clone. Alex Anzalone drafted around the same range when he came out of Florida. Um, Literally, like these are adjectives, and I brought up his analysis. Rolder does a good job of maneuvering and filtering through traffic and is a good form tackler. He can play sideline to sideline, but is best suited to play downhill due to a lack of great game speed. That is literally Alex Anzalone. Rolder is 6'2", 238, so he's got good size. Um, I don't think he's ever going to be one where you're going to want to use speed, um, to go up against faster running backs or tight ends or anything. But he is a guy that if he is going to get his hands on someone, he's going to bring them down. Very, very strong tackler. I think some people viewed him as the second strongest tackler in this entire draft class, next to the Rodriguez kid that went out of Texas Tech. So, um, although we don't have a ton of game tape on Rolder, he's one of these guys that waited his turn at Michigan. He didn't transfer out. He was a good baseball player. Um, he kind of waited his turn, and then when he had an opportunity to play, he impressed.
Made the most of it for sure. So the
Yeah.
Lions then go to the 5th round at 157, pick up cornerback Keith Abney, the second out of Arizona State. And we're starting to fall into a familiar trap of Lions drafting undersized corners, which I don't really understand the appeal behind that, especially as today's NFL receiver just gets bigger and taller and stronger. I don't know where the appeal of these undersized corners comes in, but he did make all Big 12 a season ago, recorded just under 100 tackles, broke up 21 passes and 5 interceptions over the last 2 years as a Sun Devil. Arizona State has played some of their best football in program history these past couple years under Kenny Dillingham, so he's really been playing under some bright lights down there in Tempe. Again, the corner room, the secondary as a whole, just decimated both by injury and by departure. So you're looking at a guy who you can actually bring in as depth that, hey, this guy actually carries a little bit of pedigree with him. This guy was a 5th round pick. This guy played meaningful snaps in college. He's not a guy who you have to look up. Who in the heck is he? I've never heard of him in my life. Next time you're going towards needing to spell guys for injury or what have you, you're trying to do away with the whole Legion of Whom thing. At least the depth you're bringing in is a guy you've actually heard of before. In my mind, a decent pick at a 5th round, if you ask me.
So I think of all the picks we had, this was the biggest value that we had. I'm going to keep making analogies here because if we just had our Alex Anzalone replacement, this is our Amik Robertson replacement. He
Yeah.
does a lot of what Amik Robertson does. And if I'm making a stand on this draft class, I think Miller and Moore are going to be starting by the end of year one. I think Keith Abney is the third starter in there. I think this is our starting nickelback by the end of next season. He is very, very instinctual as far as breaking up passes. staying in lockstep with receivers that aren't like of Jamison Williams speed, or of Tyreek Hill speed. So he's got solid speed. I think his speed and then just not being super strong are some of the reasons why he, fell to this size 5'10", 187. I mean, he's small. He's not a big corner. So obviously you don't want him going up and trying to go tackle a tight end or, a larger running back or anything like that. But he's a guy that you would feel comfortable going up against a lot of slot receivers and probably dominating in that aspect there. So I think this is a tremendous value pick, and probably of all the picks we had, I think the biggest value and one that I can see again maybe a third starter out of this class.
And Lord knows the Lions need all the help they can get in that secondary. So
Yeah.
if you have a somewhat NFL ready guy in your back pocket to throw out there, whether it's right away or whether it's a little bit later in the season after he has some time to get his sea legs under him in the NFL, I think that's a huge get for them in the 5th round. Just a few picks later at 168, the Lions trade up to draft wide receiver out of Kentucky, Kendrick Law. And again, talking about filling roles of specific guys, I think you might be looking at a potential Khalif Raymond replacement in this guy. He only had 53 catches for 540 yards, but the overwhelming majority of his production came after the catch. So he's a speed demon, burns you after the catch, really a factor in the screen game, in the short dump off, and he can also be a threat in the return game. Now that the new kickoff rules is again swinging back to favor more returns on these kickoffs. And he can also be a gunner, too. So, again, 5th round, he's not a guy that you're going to say, hey, you're going to get a lot of target share from Jared Goff necessarily, but one or two gadget plays a game on offense and give him some reps on special teams. I think, again, here's kind of your Khalif Raymond plug in here.
He's not going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown because he doesn't run routes like him. He doesn't have the hands like him. But from a physicality standpoint, this guy is really, really strong. You see that guy out there, and you can tell like he can take on some hits. He is one of the strongest downfield blockers that have come out in recent history. That is what Todd McShay said about Kendrick Law.
Todd,
So
Todd,
keep that in
Todd,
mind.
Todd.
Todd. So again, these are some of the attributes that like when you start getting into the 5th round, you want to find some things that okay, well if this guy's going to play special teams or it's going to take a long time for him to like actually crack a rotation and play 5 to 10 snaps in a game, what is it that these people do better than just about anyone else? Like, can you find those skills? With Kendrick Law, it's going to be the return game. It's going to be great as a gunner. It's going to be great in setting up blocks. And, you know, we'll see if he actually gets involved in the pass game at all as a rookie. He'll probably be fun to watch in preseason, is what my guess is. But at least on special teams, I think he's got the attributes to make a difference.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's too many cooks in the kitchen as far as the target share, who Jared Goff's going to be throwing that ball to. And I just don't think that was the primary reason for bringing him on board. But I think in just the right opportunity, I think he has what it takes to definitely help this team. You're listening to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progard chopping it up with Phil Byrne as we recap the 2026 NFL Draft as it pertains to the Detroit Lions. We've covered rounds 1 through 5. We'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention the last 2 players that the Lions drafted. In the 6th round at 205, Lions take interior D lineman Skylar Gill Howard out of Texas Tech. And if you're any type of a college football fan, you may very well know that Texas Tech had arguably the most expensive defensive line in the sport a season ago, led them to a phenomenal 2025 season down there in Lubbock, and the Lions bring him into the mix. You never really know what you're going to get with a 6th-round pick or a 7th-round pick, if it's just depth or if you're going to find a diamond in the rough or if he's a guy that's not even going to make the team. You don't really know, but in any case, Phil, the Lions do have a low-key need on that interior D-line. You know that DJ Reader is no longer with us. I mean, he's alive physically, but he's no longer with the team here. I'm not trying to kill anybody off, but anyway, so Reader's no longer in the mix. You don't know what you're going to get from Aleem McNeil from a health standpoint and a production standpoint. And Tyleik Williams is heading into year number 2, and we're still not fully sold on what he can offer right this minute. So, interior D line depth at this point, not really a bad thing if you can get it at 6 in the 6th round, but you really don't know what you're going to get.
What I like about Skylar Gill Howard, though, is he does have a pretty interesting backstory going from being a FedEx driver as a walk on at a D2 school, moving his way up to Northern Illinois to then transferring to Texas Tech. So he is someone that I think, when motivated, um, doesn't allow his limitations with his size at that position hold him back. He can be very productive. Maybe not the best athlete, maybe not the best traits guy in the world or anything like that, but one of these guys that, like, as a rotation piece, he's probably going to be a little bit more consistent than what we've had with Levi Onwuzurike.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting that the only NFL hat that he owned prior to the draft was a Detroit Lions hat. So it's like it was meant to be, right?
Yeah, so good story there with him. These are the guys that, like, when we get to know the team a little bit more through training camp, preseason, you get to hear them talk a little bit. They're guys that eventually become, big fans with the fans themselves.
And with the final pick of the Lions draft at pick 222 in the 7th round, Lions pick up edge rusher Tyree West out of Tennessee. Again, it kind of seems in many cases depth at best, at worst practice squad, or doesn't even make the team. Any thoughts on this guy before we wrap up the Lions draft side of things?
No, Tennessee had a pretty good team. I think they had a number of players get drafted this year. Was a little unfamiliar with him. When we drafted him, I was like, Tyre West, okay. But no, it is Tyree, Tyre, 6'3", 290 pounds. So he's a stout guy, and I don't really know if he's got a set position necessarily, but they like the strength and power that he has. He's pretty strong, so we'll see if that can translate at all.
So there you have it for the draft, and we'll be seeing these guys in rookie mini camp very soon, if not already. I'm not even sure if they've even started doing some little things like that, but definitely those activities with the rookies is going to start picking up very, very soon. Off-season program is really already underway for the Lions and a lot of teams, so we'll be hearing more out of Allen Park as some of these activities take place. Any additional feedback from you, Phil, as far as the draft as a whole? I don't like doing the whole who won, who lost, give a letter grade, anything like that. But do you think that the Lions did their part with this draft compared to some of their contemporaries? Do you think that it was mission accomplished with the 2026 draft, or do you think there were still things left on the table?
So I think we as Lions fans know who this core of the team is. I think we know that injuries have derailed this team the last couple of seasons. What I'm a little concerned about is that this was so safe and by the books with the first handful of rounds. We didn't trade up. But to me, this is all about risk assessment. And is what you are going to give up, and if you're talking next year's draft class with picks that we won't have by trading up, worth doing that? At the end of the day, I think Brad Holmes said no, it wasn't. So although we will never say we drafted for need, I think you look at some of those picks and who they have lost through free agency, and in some way, like, I think they played this very safe. They drafted for a little bit of need. I don't know if they're gonna have a Pro Bowler in this bunch. Um, so I think they've got guys that are gonna make an impact and play. I don't think they're gonna be guys that, like, you're gonna be sitting on Sunday and be like, "Oh man, that guy," like, let's talk about him until Wednesday and a couple days after the fact. So, um, and quite honestly, if we're talking about Blake Miller as an offensive lineman, if you go by the book and you're not noticeable, you're probably doing a
You've
damn
done
good
your
job.
job. Absolutely.
right?
And
So
now to piggyback off of that, is there any team out there amongst the other 31 that you think really nailed it with this year's draft? Anybody jump off the page to you based on a particular pick or body of work in the draft? Who really just got it done in 2026 NFL draft?
well, I don't think it was any of the teams in our own division, thankfully. The Packers did not have a first round pick as part of the Micah Parsons deal. Chicago and Minnesota. I really like Chicago getting Dylan Thieneman, the safety out of Oregon. He is going to be a day one starter. He is probably going to be an impact player. He was still on the board when we were picking. So, we got to hope our safeties will get healthy eventually with that. But nothing that those teams did really blew me out of the water. I think Minnesota going with the defensive tackle one spot after we did from Florida was a little bit of a reach, in my opinion. I think the Cleveland Browns had a pretty good draft. I think all things considered, they got a couple of receivers, which they needed. They got some help on the offensive line. I just don't know if they've got the quarterback and the coach and the system in play to get things done at the end of the day. But I like from their draft and like who they drafted, I think they did a good job there. There's a handful of teams. I think the one to me though is going to be, what do the quarterbacks from this first round do? Is Fernando Mendoza a guy that is going to actually be able to translate to the NFL like a lot of people think he's going to be able to do? He's probably not going to play right away with Kirk Cousins in the building. What about Ty Simpson? This is a guy that, is he even going to be starting in 2 years? How long does Stafford have? I think we both consider the Rams to be one of the front runners to, make the Super Bowl, certainly coming out of the NFC, no less. But they didn't add anything to help their current team in the first round
Yeah,
there.
F
So,
them picks. That's what they say out there in
yeah, pretty
England.
much, right? Yeah.
One team that really had, and I hate to say it, but one team that has really jumped off the page to me has been the Cowboys. How they've been able to really retool that defense in the wake of the Micah Parsons trade, maybe at his old gritty age of 83 or whatever he is, Jerry Jones still has a little something to show everybody that he can build a Super Bowl caliber team after all. And people were saying, oh, what are you going to do now that Parsons is gone? You can't possibly come out better on the other side. Well, let's not forget, Phil, Micah Parsons may not play the good majority of this upcoming season because he tore that ACL so late in the season last year. And quietly, Dallas has slowly started to put piece after piece after piece together on this defense. And they may collectively, some of the parts, as opposed to the individual, they may wind up with a better overall defense by the time things are all said and done, as opposed to when Parsons was actually suited up for the Cowboys.
Yeah. And Caleb Downs, I think, was a phenomenal pick. That is a team that has had issues in that secondary for the longest time. He is an absolute playmaker back there. I think he's going to probably be the captain of their defense before too long. Him and then getting Lawrence out of UCF later on in the draft, I think that was another savvy pick as well. So, is it going to be enough to overtake the Eagles, who, again, Howie Roseman, he does wonders every year. Like, that's the biggest thing. But the way it's looking right now, you know, I don't know so much about where the Commanders and the Giants are. I think the Giants have a good young team, and John Harbaugh is now the coach. But I think you're at least going to get a wild card team the way things are looking out of the NFC East
Absolutely.
right now between either Eagles or Cowboys.
And I almost forgot to mention the guy who, if you were to line them all up and say you can have any of these guys off the Michigan D lineman from last year, who are you going to take? I would have taken Jay Sean Barham probably, and he wound up going to the Cowboys in the third round. So, again, just very quietly doing a great job of retooling that defense. I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't at least give them a little bit of a shout out for doing that. Last thing I want to touch on before we head off after this very fun and exciting and productive episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast post draft is a little bit.
Rossini. No, sorry.
Nope,
Okay.
nope. We're gonna hold off on that for
All right.
everybody for everybody's good. But yeah, again, train wreck material. Can't look away, But who knew what and when? How long did it go on? Da 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 da. You can do a Keith Morrison Dateline NBC on this if you really feel like it. I'm sure, but that's a topic for another day.
Sedona, Arizona.
Yeah, I'm Keith
Anyways,
Morrison.
okay.
Anyway,
sorry, I completely. I'm being a jackass here.
That's okay.
Let's close this out. What do you got?
And by the way, the Lions did not draft Mr. Jackass in the 2026 NFL draft, so unfortunately, he went someplace else. But anyway, a little bit of a programming note to pass along. So obviously, we've done this thing week in and week out for a long time, and we're not going anywhere. You're still stuck with us, and once we're up and running in the regular season, you're not going to notice any difference in what Phil and I do whatsoever. But Phil and I came to a mutual agreement that between now and probably around the time training camp gets up and rolling, we're kind of going to let the offseason breathe a little bit. So unless something big or pressing or breaking happens, Phil and I are going to come up to you with a new Kneecaps for Breakfast episode every 2 weeks. So if you're subscribed to us, your podcast is going to drop to your device automatically. So you're not going to need to do anything. As long as you're subscribed to us, and we hope you are, nothing's going to change. It's just going to change in how frequently Phil and I are going to be coming to you. And there's a few different reasons for that. Number one, the Lions are coming off a tough season. There wasn't a whole lot of good vibes. We're not coming at you saying that we're being front runners or anything like that. Quite the contrary. It just seems that it gets to a point where if the Lions didn't do so great, they didn't have as maybe fruitful of an offseason as you'd like. They're kind of in a prove it 2026 right here. We kind of want to, again, let things breathe a little bit. We don't want to be beating dead horses and airing maybe more negative, dirty laundry than what we'd like to. We kind of, again, maybe giving it some space and allowing things to play out a little bit and then starting to attack it when there's actually stuff going on might be in everybody's best interest. And then beyond that, Phil, you and I just have things coming up this summer to where we don't want this to be a chore. We want this to continue to be fun. This has been a lot of fun for me, Phil, over the last 2.5 years. I know it's been the same for you.
Yeah.
We just don't want this to be something that is on our to-do list. We want this to continue to be fun, and giving it some space in between now and training camp just seemed like the right thing to do.
Well, I mean, we're not in the listenership stratosphere as, New Heights or the St. Brown podcast or anything like that. We don't make any extra money on this. So this isn't even a side hustle. This is literally just a passion project that two guys that, went to college together, that did a radio show in college together, both Lions fans for life, went to the NFL draft together, have stayed in contact, have both essentially left the broadcasting industry, still want to be connected, still have some stories to share, still want to go ahead and talk about the Lions. And again, like Vince said, we're not going anywhere. Like, we're just trying to let this offseason breathe a little bit. Once training camp, regular season, everything like that, so you're still going to get our weekly shows. But Vince, I know you're burning the candle at both ends. I got a lot of stuff going on at, my place here, for this summer. And again, we don't want to make something that is a passion of ours get dwindled down because, God forbid, it took us forever to get that other defensive end other than Aiden Hutchinson, and it finally came in the draft, we think, with Derek Moore. But we'll still have plenty of things to share about. I'm hoping to get out to, a training camp practice this summer and be able to kind of share that. And, I think we also want to get some of our buddies on too that are Lions fans this summer and kind of have some really fun shows. So like when we do have a show, we can have,
it's an event.
Yeah, exactly.
And nobody says that we can't jump in on an off week if something breaking happens.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says that we can't come on and do just a quick recap of what's going on, gauge each other's thoughts. That way we don't let a week, 10 days or something go by if something real juicy happens down in Allen Park. We can jump in on an off weekend. There's no contract or verbiage that says we can't, but unless you hear anything otherwise, we're pretty much going to do a once every 2 week type of thing. Lately, we've been doing the drop into your device on Tuesday morning type of thing because it seems like off-season news always seems to break on Mondays. So we've been trying to kind of move the goalposts in philosophy a little bit and kind of do a Monday night recording that drops to your device on Tuesday. I kind of think that might be what we do moving forward, but we ask that you be flexible with us, but we don't want you to have to worry, hey, they haven't had an episode, in a week or so. So this is what's going on until further notice, till about the time training camp's up and rolling. And yeah, that's what's new with us.
Yep. So I think you'll have better shows too. We'll probably try to make them a little bit longer, when we do record and things like that. But I don't think anyone wants to listen to a 20-minute episode. It's just, you can tell, like,
hey, the Lions need an edge outside. Hey, Nuggets said. I mean, how many shows of that have we done?
Yeah. So I promise you, we will bring it our all when you get our episodes and we're behind the mic and we're talking. But just wanted to give you a little bit of an update, just in case you're like, hey, what's going on with the podcast or anything. And I even heard a couple about this week about where we were with taping and everything. So I'm at least enjoying the fact that people wanted our takes on the draft and everything. So
100%.
We're very fortunate to have some sort of creative outlet like this, and we'll continue it on.
So there we are. That is our NFL draft recap on Kneecaps for Breakfast. Thanks for bearing with us, as it took us a few extra days to get to you, but you got Phil's and myself's thoughts nonetheless. Phil and I will be back here the week after next with a all-new episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. We would be absolutely thrilled and appreciative if you joined us for that. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning, go Lions, or down the field, over and out.